Alright, this video is for my kaiju fans. We are going to rank every Godzilla kaiju. Well, everyone from the movies, at least. There are a few stipulations for this list, though. Number one is, you may notice, Godzilla himself is not here, because he would obviously go up into S tier, and I feel like that's a little bit unfair. Maybe if you guys like this video, I will do a separate tier list where I rank every Godzilla design, every Godzilla suit, that kind of thing, and give that its own specific video. But this is going to be everybody else, everybody except Godzilla. I'm going to put them where I think they belong in the ranking system. Also, stipulations are, I don't have different iterations for every era. For example, when I get to King Ghidorah, I don't have the Showa King Ghidorah, the Heisei King Ghidorah. You know, I don't have them separated. It'll just be basically the idea of Ghidorah, the character itself, because throughout all the iterations, even though the designs may change, mostly Ghidorah stays the same character, other than in GMK, but still, nonetheless, it's Ghidorah, right? The only one where I have multiple incarnations of is Mechagodzilla, because Mechagodzilla does change in character every single time he's reintroduced. Every single Mechagodzilla is completely different than the one that came before, so in that instance, I think that makes sense to have every Mechagodzilla here. And I did also add the Monsterverse Kong, because that Kong is, once again, extremely different than the original Toho Kong from the 60s. So those are the ones that show up multiple times, but I don't have multiple Mothras, multiple Rodans, multiple Ghidorahs, because I feel like the core essence of those characters mostly always stays the same. So it's going to be me ranking them not on design, but on how I feel about the character in itself, what I feel about that specific kaiju. So it'll kind of represent all-encompassing versions of that kaiju, if that makes sense. I also shook up the list a little bit because, you know, seeing A, B, C, D, that gets boring after a while, so I figured I would make my own list here, but they essentially stand for the same thing. So S tier is going to go S into Skreonk tier, because we all know Skreonk is Godzilla's choice of words. The second one, which would be A tier, I'm going to put the Titan tier. Still very strong, very powerful, not quite up to S tier, but just about there. Then I have the Monster Island tier, which these monsters are good. I'd say these monsters are good. They're not amazing. They're not the best of the best, but these are solid monsters nonetheless. Then the second half, we're going to go downhill a little bit. We got the Zillion tier, which these monsters are serviceable. They're okay. They're all right. You know, it's kind of like, it's a slow Wednesday. We need a monster. Let's throw one in there. You know, it's just like, it's okay, right? The Army Tank tier, well, we know how the Army Tanks are treated in the Godzilla franchise. They are pretty much useless. They do their best. They try hard, but ultimately they completely fall flat. The Army Tanks, yeah, they just can't make it at the end of the day. And then the final tier, F tier, is Ghidorah tier, because Ghidorah sucks. All right, and I'm mostly going in order from how these monsters were introduced. Once again, we're only doing the live-action movies, not the video games or anything like that. So let's get right into it and start with our boy, Anguirus. I think Anguirus is very underappreciated. I feel like Anguirus is kind of the Krillin or maybe the Yamcha of the Godzilla franchise, where he always just seems to get the short end of the stick. You know, he shows up, he does his best, he gets his ass kicked. But at the end of the day, he was the very first Godzilla antagonist, and that goes a long way. I like his design a lot, too. He's one of the monsters that I really wish they would bring back in the newer films, whether it's the Toho version or the Monsterverse. I think there is a lot of potential there with Anguirus, and I guess maybe just going back to childhood, going back to watching those Showa-era films. You know, I always loved when Anguirus would show up, despite the fact that he would always get his ass kicked. I'm going to put Anguirus up into the Titan tier, because I do think he's worthy of that. I don't think he's the best of the best, because there are better monsters that came after, but I think Anguirus is a solid kaiju that does deserve some respect. Next up was King Kong. After Godzilla raids again, Toho made a deal and was able to bring King Kong, the most legendary monster of the West, to fight the most legendary monster of the East. And this King Kong is pretty great, pretty classic, pretty iconic, I would say. He even got his own spin-off movie with King Kong Escapes. He just likes to have a good time. He fights some squid monsters. He gets drunk. He passes out. He's like our uncle at Thanksgiving. It's just like, he just is, something that you got to have there every once in a while. So I think that this Kong is not up to par with, being at the top of the top, but I do think it's either Titan or Monster Island for me. I guess at the end of the day, because this Kong only really got one appearance, attempt to shine in the Godzilla franchise, obviously, besides getting his own movie, but just not quite up to snuff with the other monsters that are going to be on this list. So I'm going to put him in Monster Island, which means pretty good. It'd go good, great, the best, right? In terms of the ranking here. Zillion is where you start to get mediocre. So he's above mediocre. But then we get Mothra. And I could not understand anybody not putting Mothra up in S tier, Skreonk tier. Mothra is almost just as iconic, just as classic as Godzilla ever was. I love, even though this is not a list based on designs, I love the original Mothra design so much more when she was like more fluffy and like thick. Anyways, instead of like turning into like a straight up bug like they have her in the Monsterverse, but every time Mothra shows up, it is this kind of spiritual experience. I like how Mothra kind of represents Mother Nature and Earth and protecting the world, and just always has had this sort of wholesome vibe to her in all of her incarnations, in that she is something that represents this positivity and this life cycle, because Mothra always dies and then, gives birth to the next generation that turns into the next Mothra. And it's just this continuous cycle of there's always going to be a Mothra around in one way, shape, or form. I think that the original Godzilla vs. Mothra is one of the best Godzilla films ever, not just in the Showa era, but just ever to exist. I think it's just a phenomenal film. So for me, Mothra has to be an S tier. Now, I was really debating with this next one because Rodan, I also feel, is very underappreciated sometimes, because Rodan is kind of a basic monster, right? It's just a big flying, it's like a pterodactyl. Other incarnations turned him into like a volcano, like Firebird and whatnot. But I think Rodan has definitely proven himself more than enough times to be on the same level as Godzilla or Mothra or Ghidorah or all of the major, Mount Rushmore of kaiju that exist. Like, maybe he's not quite up to Godzilla status or Mothra status, but he's right there next to them. And that's why I was having a hard time deciding if I wanted to put Rodan into Titan tier or Skreonk tier. But you know what? And since it's my list, we're going to put him up there. Not above Mothra. Not above Mothra. This is very important. But just below. I think that Rodan deserves to be there because he had his own film way back in the day. He's been around, pretty much the longest, one of Godzilla's oldest enemies, and just a really cool monster to begin with. I love the amount of destruction that he can cause. And I've always wanted them to make a modern day standalone Rodan movie. I'm sure they wouldn't at this point, like they'd have to put Godzilla in it, but I always picture it sort of like a very fast, intense, sort of like Top Gun Maverick meets Rodan, like a bunch of people in planes in the sky doing a bunch of aerial moves trying to battle Rodan. And I could picture it in my mind being awesome, but I don't know if they'll ever bring it to the screen. I don't know. Monsterverse, hire me as a director. I'm sure I'll be able to make it great. Good first film, right? Then we come to King Ghidorah, Monster Zero. I don't think there's any question whatsoever. This is also Skreonk tier. There is no greater antagonist to Godzilla than King Ghidorah. He has earned his spot as one of the coolest, most terrifying monsters. It's a giant, three-headed gold dragon from space that shoots lightning. Like, every single adjective there, every single descriptive word just gets cooler and cooler as it goes along. Every iteration of Ghidorah is awesome, whether it's the Showa era, and yeah, his backstory changes in the Heisei era, but it's still Ghidorah at the end of the day. His story changes a bit in GMK, but it's still Ghidorah. Ghidorah is always awesome and always a fantastic final foe for Godzilla to battle. I love the differences in their abilities. And it's no surprise to me that these are the three monsters that were chosen when Michael Dougherty decided to make his Godzilla film, because these are the best of the best. It is ironic that they're all flying monsters and Godzilla is the only one that doesn't fly between the four of them, but I just can't imagine Ghidorah in any other category. I can't imagine anybody ranking Ghidorah and putting him in any other category. He is the Joker to Godzilla's Batman. He is the yin to his yang. He is the ultimate antagonist. He's Ghidorah. But perhaps I spoke too soon, because if anybody recognizes this next one, then you're a real one. This is the giant condor from Godzilla versus the Sea Monster. Why did I put him in here? Well, listen, the giant condor has taken on a life of his own. Recently, there was some kind of request as to what character was going to get the next figure, and it was a poll where people would vote. And whether they did it unironically or ironically, the giant condor won. So pretty soon we are going to get a figure of the giant condor from Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster that's on screen for about 1 minute. As you see right here from Godzilla Toho Official, the results are in. Giant condor got the most votes worldwide to become the next fan-selected movie monster series figure. And you know what? It's about time we give him the respect that he deserves. No, this is the kind of thing. This is like Schnoz from Berserk, if you guys are familiar. It's a creature that shows up once, never shows up again, doesn't even have an official name, and somehow became a meme that got larger and larger, and now Giant Condor is massively, respected by Godzilla fans. I don't know how. Look, I can't in good consciousness put it up in the top couple tiers, but you know what? Because of how hard this monster has climbed up the ranks within the last 60 years of relevancy, I'm going to put it in the zillion tier because it deserves it. And maybe it'll get higher as time goes on. Next up is Ebirah, the sea monster. This one you could easily write off because it's just a giant lobster, right? But I do have a very soft spot for this movie because as a kid, there were a few Godzilla Showa movies that I would watch all the time. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, King Kong vs. Godzilla, and Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. And so this was one of those movies that I watched the most as a kid. And so I always loved Ebirah for that reason. Whenever I was a kid, playing in the swimming pool, I'd always pretend I was Godzilla fighting the sea monster and shit. So it goes deep for me. And this is a personal list, not an objective list. I know I can't put Ebirah up that high because he's really not that interesting. But I do think that I'm going to put it in the zillion tier. And yeah, I am going to put it above the giant condor. I'm sorry. Okay. All right. Here we are. We've reached this point. Son of Godzilla. Minya. Manila. Whatever you want to call him. Fat tub of lard. Just look at this. Look at this dork. Look at this repugnant dork right here. What is this? Now, I know that Son of Godzilla has a lot of fans, and hey, actually, it's not that bad of a movie. I think it gets a little bit too much hate. I do agree. And I like movies that take place on a tropical island like Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. I like the sort of adventure, exotic feel to it. But Minya himself, as a character and as a design, he's an army tank, dude. He's doing his best. He's doing his best, like an army tank. But ultimately, he's just gonna crash and burn. I hate his design so much. Just so much I hate it. He doesn't do anything useful. He's super annoying. I get it. He's a kid. I get it, right? I give him the benefit of the doubt. He's a kid. But he's not going up any higher than Army Tank, in my opinion. It just does not work for me. Having said that, though, the other monsters that are in Son of Godzilla, I think are pretty cool. I mean, they're basically we got Kamaculus and Kamunga here. It's basically just a giant praying mantis and a giant spider. But the thing about it is, in any other series, a giant praying mantis would be fucking awesome. Because praying mantises are scary as hell. And if you imagine their power, their strength, their cunning at their size to the size of a kaiju, that is like the most devastating creature you could imagine, with its pincers and the way that it bites heads off, and just how insanely strong they are comparative, to their size, So if you had a giant praying mantis, that would be absolutely terrifying. It's just, in a Godzilla Kaiju franchise, you have, giant gold three-headed dragons from space, and in comparison, a praying mantis does not seem as cool. But I think that it's all right. I'm gonna put them both up into Monster Island. I think giant praying mantis, giant spider, they're cool. I enjoy them for what they are. They obviously will never be on the top tier levels of kaiju, but a little bit underrated, a little bit underrated. I appreciate them. Okay, then we get into some monsters that are in the movie Destroy All Monsters, but here's also the thing, because some monsters that are in Destroy All Monsters have a lot of scenes, like Godzilla or Mothra or Anguirus, right? But then there's others that have basically a glorified cameo. Both Baragon and Varan have like 30 seconds of screen time in Destroy All Monsters. Varan is just a puppet. It's not even, they don't even bother to like put a dude in a suit for that one. Now, Baragon does have a lot more to do in GMK, and goes out swinging like a boss, and we're going to, consider everything the character's done together in this list. But it is a little bit hard to rank some of these characters just based upon the fact that they're not really in Godzilla movies. I mean, Baragon you can say is now, but Varan, not really. He's had his own movie, but in a Godzilla movie, he's just on a stick, And because of that, Varan's going to go into the army tank tier. He's going to go down there because he just doesn't, he's doing his best, I guess, but what else can he do? Baragon, on the other hand, I'm going to put Baragon up in Monster Island, and I'm going to put him above the other two there. I think Baragon, he is, I guess he really would be the Yamcha of the Godzilla universe, more so than in Garrus, because he really only gets a chance to shine in GMK. And within that, he puts up quite a fight, man. He does his best, and he sacrifices his life to try to beat Godzilla, but ultimately, he just gets his ass kicked. Then we have Manda, which is an interesting one. Pretty much only featured in Destroy All Monsters and a little bit in Final Wars. It's kind of cool. It's like a giant snake, but it does have little feet on it as well. I'm not really sure where I want to put Manda, because I think the design is fine, but it's not anything amazing, and it doesn't really do anything too incredible in the Godzilla movies. It's just kind of okay. So I guess Zillion tier, but I will put Manda above the Giant Khan. And then Gorosaurus. Gorosaurus, of course, featured in the King Kong Escapes movie, but then featured in Destroy All Monsters. And look, as a kid that loves dinosaurs, I liked Gorosaurus when I watched him in Destroy All Monsters when I was a kid. I mean, he's basically just a T-Rex. I mean, a little bit different, but, he's got that jump kick move, which is pretty sweet. Not really too much to say beyond that. He doesn't have any like special abilities like atomic breath or anything that Godzilla can do. He's just basically a dinosaur. And dinosaurs are pretty sweet. So I'll put him in Cillian tier, but I'll put him at the top. I'll put him at the top of Cillian tier. He's all right. Then we have Ghidorah. And I specifically made a tier for Ghidorah because Ghidorah sucks. I know there are some people that appreciate, Godzilla's Revenge or whatever the original title was, All Monsters Attack, but for me, every time I've tried to go back and give that movie another shot, I never like it anymore. It's basically just a kid has a fantasy that he visits Monster Island, and Ghidorah is the representation of his bullies, but Ghidorah's design is just awful to begin with, and he's featured in an awful movie. I don't really like anything about him. His voice is annoying. Like, his roar is super annoying. Ghidorah is just like the pinnacle of the final dingleberry of the Godzilla franchise when it was starting to go downhill. And it's just, he has to be last. He has to be last. I don't think there's another monster that I'm going to put below him. But hey, at least he has his very own tier named after him, and that's got to count for something. Then we get to Ghidorah, a very strange monster made from pollution and toxic waste, and also featured in pretty much the strangest Godzilla movie ever, with a bunch of 70s sort of animations and rave music and, flashing lights, and Godzilla and Ghidorah fight pretty much the entire movie, which is very unique and different. Now, I will tell you one thing about Godzilla vs. Ghidorah is, okay, so you know my Godzilla love started when I was a child, and I pretty much saw all of the Showa movies when I was a kid. The only one that ever escaped me was Godzilla vs. Ghidorah, Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster. I don't know why. I just never saw it until I was an adult. And I think it just has to do with availability because all of those movies I had on old VHS tapes, you know? So I guess just the Godzilla vs. Ghidorah VHS never showed up my way. And it was the only Showa era film that I had not seen until I was like in my mid 20s. And so I don't have as much nostalgia for Ghidorah as I do the other Showa enemies. But I do think Ghidorah is a great concept. I don't think he's in a great movie, but the idea of the character and the way that it can shapeshift and the way that it's made from toxic waste and it turns people into skeletons and it melts buildings and stuff, like everything Ghidorah can do is really cool. So for those reasons, I'm going to put Ghidorah up in Monster Island, and I'm going to put him just below Kong for me. Just below Kong for me. But if they ever did like a remake or a reboot and they brought Ghidorah into the mix, I think you could do a lot with him with modern day technology because he fits more for a monster that would be made with CGI as opposed to like being in like pseudomation kind of stuff, you know? So I hope Ghidorah does come back someday. Next up is Gigan, and I know that I am in the minority with this one, but I never really cared for Gigan that much. I know, Godzilla fans hate me when I say this, man. Like, both the monster design and the movie itself, never been a big Godzilla vs. Gigan fan. I mean, I think it's okay. I don't hate the movie or anything. Like, I think it's fine. But I just, it's never been one of my top favorites. It reuses a lot of stock footage from other movies, which is another problem that Godzilla's Revenge has. But Gigan himself, I get it. He's like an alien cyborg creature. I mean, the hook hands are kind of cool, but I just never was like a big Gigan person. So for me, personally, I'm going to have to put Gigan. Look, I'll put him at the top of the Cillian tier. And I know that that's going to enrage some people, and I'm sorry, but Gigan never did it for me. I don't know how to explain it. I just think he's just okay. Megalon, on the other hand, no, I'm just kidding. Megalon kind of goes in the same category for me. Megalon is like a guilty pleasure movie. You know, it's one of those Godzilla films where it's like you go through phases, right? Like you like it as a kid and then you kind of hate it because it kind of represents where Godzilla gets its reputation for just being like stupid and silly and, you know, the Showa era, the late Showa era, just monster brawls. It's what people make fun of about Godzilla movies. But then you get a little bit older than that and you kind of come back around and you're like, you know what? Godzilla versus Megalon is something that's, it's a treat. It's a pleasure. Like, it is so stupid that it becomes amazing to watch the final fight scene between, you know, Megalon and Gigan versus Godzilla and Jet Jaguar. It is just a joy to watch it while having some drinks, watch it with some friends, and it becomes one of the most enjoyable movie watching experiences you could have. I can't put Megalon higher than Gigan, but I gotta say that, you know, as you get older, it's like my opinion of that movie has drastically shifted multiple times. It's like as a kid, I liked it. Then I got a little bit older, like a teenager, and I didn't like it. And now I'm in my 30s, and I'm like, you know what? I like it again. Same thing with Jet Jaguar. You know, he is basically just an Ultraman ripoff, but goddamn, that theme song is good. Come on. Punch, punch, punch. Jet Jaguar, Jet Jaguar, Jet Jaguar. Yeah, he goes up in Monster Island. Jet Jaguar is awesome. Then we have King Caesar from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla and also in Final Wars. Again, this Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, the original, is the Godzilla movie that I watched the most as a kid. I think it was just because it was the first VHS tape I had of it, but I, for some reason, never got sick of that King Caesar song because I knew that as soon as she was done singing it, this motherfucker was going to show up and kick some ass. Actually, he gets his ass kicked, but I like the design. He just basically, he kind of reminds me of like an ancient, like Monkey King, like Chinese folklore sort of creature. I don't know how to describe it, but I like King Caesar quite a bit. I think he's going to go up in Monster Island tier as well, and I'm going to put him above the Smog Monster for me. I know that might enrage some people, but I'm going to put them up there. So we got King Kong and King Caesar right next to each other. All right, Mechagodzilla. Now, Mechagodzilla is the one where I have his different incarnations featured within this list because every Mechagodzilla is very different. The original Mechagodzilla, to me, is the best Mechagodzilla. Kiryu is awesome. I know, we'll talk about it, but this Mechagodzilla just looks fucking nasty. He looks mean. He looks ruthless. I love the rusted design. I love like the pointy angles of the face. And personally, I do prefer my Mechagodzilla being evil. Okay, the other incarnations, as we'll get into it, is a little bit more like a Gundam that you use to fight Godzilla. The original Mechagodzilla is controlled remotely. There's nobody inside of him, and he's just evil, and he has weapons upon weapons. He is the doppelganger, villain of the Godzilla franchise that I love the most, and that original Mechagodzilla is my favorite version. So much so, I think I gotta do it. Original Showa Mechagodzilla is in Screonk tier. Now Titanosaurus from Terror of Mechagodzilla. Again, super annoying roar. Like, I hate his roar so much. I do think he's a little bit cooler than Gorosaurus, though. He's got a little bit more to him. He's a little bit more aquatic. Got a little bit more abilities and whatnot. But ultimately, I don't think he's that great. I think he's just okay. So I'm going to put Titanosaurus above Gorosaurus. I'm going to put him in the Zillion tier as well. All right, so we technically finished the Showa era. Now we're moving into monsters that were introduced in the Heisei era. And we get to my girl, Biollante. Biollante, to me, is, I'm not going to say the best Godzilla Kaiju, because I would put Ghidorah number 1. And because of legacy, I have to put Mothra number 2. But you know what? Biollante is going number 3. Biollante is going number 3. I love everything about Biollante. I love the design. I love both forms of Biollante. I love the backstory. I love the lore. And I love the movie that Biollante is featured in. It is other than the original, it is my favorite Godzilla movie. I love this film. I love the look of it. I love the music of it. Biollante is this creature that is created with Godzilla cells, plant cells, and maybe the soul of a lost human being. Who knows? It becomes this giant rose that, is similar to Godzilla. It's got these tentacle things with biting mouths on the end of them. It is just this immense, terrifying creature that also has this heart to it in many ways. And then, of course, its second form at the end of the movie, which is the image there where it turns into this crocodile, giant creature, even bigger than Godzilla. Oh man, I love Biollante, dude. I love Biollante so much. Design, concept, execution. It's so good. Biollante needs to come back and is in a Screonk tier for me. Now, I know I said there would be one version of the character to kind of represent all eras, but with Mecha King Ghidorah, I do think this one deserves its own spot because this one is no longer the Ghidorah we once knew. This one is it started that idea of a mech, kind of being controlled a little bit by somebody, and just the design is completely different. It kind of is its own character in many ways, and it's even called, Mecha King Ghidorah, like it's a different entity. So I figured it's, maybe it's cheating a little bit, but it's worth putting Mecha King Ghidorah on here. And we've only seen it one time, which I think is a shame. But I guess the other Ghidorahs didn't get fucked up enough to come back as a mech. Mecha King Ghidorah is super cool. It's a super cool design. It's a super cool idea. It was a good way to sort of do something a little bit different with the character. I'm going to put Mecha King Ghidorah up in Monster Island. I'm going to put it above King Caesar, actually. I think that it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Then we got Batra, which is sort of an evil doppelganger of Mothra, but not really evil. A little bit more chaotic good. I will destroy what's destroying the planet, I like the design of it. I like coming up with a counterpart to Mothra. Really, really big fan of the movie itself, too. The Godzilla and Mothra from the 90s. Pretty damn cool. I don't really have anything bad to say about it. I guess that's another Monster Island. Most of these creatures are going up in Monster Island for me. I'm going to put it below King Caesar, though. And Monster Island is like it's like the B tier. It's like pretty damn good. Not great, not masterful, but pretty damn good. Then we got the Heisei era Mecha Godzilla. And like I said, every iteration of Mecha Godzilla is so vastly different that they are different characters and deserve to be on the list. The Heisei version was the first time they started the idea of using Mecha Godzilla kind of like a mech to fight Godzilla. It's on the human side. You know, the humans created it. And like I said, I prefer my Mecha Godzilla being evil. And so using it as a method to fight against Godzilla for the human side is, I mean, it's okay. It's not like I hate it for that reason, but it's just not my preferred Mecha Godzilla. I also really don't like the design of this Mecha Godzilla. And I know this is not a ranking based on designs, but man, I hate this design. I really think it's the worst Mecha Godzilla design of all of them. So for that reason, it's going in Cillian tier, and it's going to go right behind Megalon. And the Heisei Godzilla Jr., also very, very different than Minya from before, because this one we actually get to see grow up into another Godzilla. By the time we get to Godzilla versus Destroya, it's essentially Godzilla. It's like another Godzilla for sure. So, you know, I think that the progression that they do between the three movies that this monster is featured in was a nice attempt at continuity, number one, but also to not have it fall into the silliness and, you know, disaster of Minya and create a monster that stands on its own. It would have been cool if they did continue that continuity and see what would happen to that Godzilla when it reached full size. But I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's bad at all. I'm going to put it up in Cillian tier. I'm going to put it, I'll put it right there. I'll put it right there, right below the Mecha Godzilla. Then we got Mogura. Listen, I forget that this is even a thing, okay? Every time I rewatch Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, which is not a lot to begin with, I forget that there's another mech in that movie at all. Like, I forget all about this mech, this kaiju, if you want to call it that. I literally never remember it. It always surprises me every time I watch it. This is Army Tank tier. I guess I'll put it above Varen because it at least does more, but like I don't care for it. I don't care for the design. You just did Mechagodzilla. You don't need to do this one again. Just completely forgettable kaiju in my opinion. It doesn't stand out. Next up is Space Godzilla, and for me, I think Space Godzilla has a lot of cool abilities. I love how it creates that crystal kind of kingdom on Earth. I love how much of a dick he is. He just shows up and kidnaps Godzilla Jr., you know? But as far as doppelganger villains go, I much prefer Mecha Godzilla than a Space Godzilla. A lot of times when you create a villain that's just kind of the carbon copy of the main character, it just, I don't know, a lot of times it falls flat for me, and I already felt like Godzilla had one of those with Mecha Godzilla, so doing it again in a different way with Space Godzilla, never been one of my favorites. I mean, it's fine. Like, again, like, I think it's okay, but it's just not one of the movies I come back to often, and Space Godzilla is not a kaiju I ever need to see come back in another Godzilla movie. Like, it's fine. You got one movie, that's great. I don't need to see you again. It's gonna go in Cillian tier. I'm gonna put Space Godzilla, I guess. We'll just keep, yeah, we're ranking it like this. We got 3 in order in a row just now, but that's where it's going to go for me. Then, Destroya! Destroya! One of the coolest, most badass Godzilla antagonists of all time, taking it back to the original film, created from the Oxygen Destroyer, and looking like the motherfucking devil. Also, one of the only Godzilla enemies that Godzilla never defeats. I always, you know, sometimes I forget about that when I haven't seen the movie in a long time, where Godzilla is out of commission before Destroya is defeated. He's ultimately defeated with help from the humans. So, you know, Destroya is like endgame shit. You know, this is when we're reaching our, you know, conclusion to the series. This was the final Godzilla movie for the longest time. Because of how it goes back to Godzilla's origins, because of just how immensely awesome that kaiju design is, and because of the film that it's portrayed in, Destroya for me is also going to go up in Screonk tier. Now this one is here because technically they use this as a kaiju in Godzilla Final Wars. They take the American Godzilla from the 90s. They call it Zilla, and they put it in Final Wars. So retroactively, it does become a Godzilla Kaiju. And so I'm not ranking this as Godzilla, I'm ranking this as Zilla. And it's one of my favorite scenes of that movie where Godzilla kicks his ass to Sum 41 and blows the shit out of him. And so Zilla is definitely going to be in the army tank tier, but he's going to be above Minya. He's going to be above Minya. By the way, I don't hate the 90s Godzilla movie. It's just not really a Godzilla movie. You know what I mean? It's more of a Jurassic Park movie. I like it, but it's not Godzilla. Orga from Godzilla 2000. This monster is all right. I like the design a lot. I like the giant, like, meat hook hands. But you don't get to see a lot of it because for the majority of the movie, it's a spaceship that turns into like a squid and then turns into the final antagonist that tries to swallow Godzilla whole, and that doesn't work out for him too well. Orga, to me, I'm going to put... Orga's kind of cool. I don't know. This one's tough. This one's a tough one for me. I guess I'll put Orga in the... you know what? Monster Island tier. Monster Island tier. Yeah, Orga's all right. We'll put him up there. Mega Gyrus, or however you pronounce it, on the other hand, not a fan. It's just basically a giant bug. You know, I know they brought it back from like the original Rodan or whatever, but it just, in execution and in design, Mega Gyrus is just kind of boring to me. You have other monsters that are similar. You know, you could have used Kamaculus, Mothra, and Batra kind of fill the same role. It just is not up to par. So for me, Mega Gyrus is also going to go in the army tank tier, above Varan. Okay, so now here's the one that is very popular in the fan base. People love Kiryu, which is the name of the Mechagodzilla from the Millennium series. And this Mechagodzilla is great. It's great in design. It's great in execution. It is great in the concept of the fact that it was built over top of the original Godzilla bones, and at one point, for some reason, doesn't matter the explanation, the original Godzilla starts to take control of this Mechagodzilla and causes a rampage. I think what they were able to do with this Mechagodzilla is something they tried to do with the Heisei version and just couldn't quite get there. But I think the Kiryu version of Mechagodzilla does that, you know, in a phenomenal job as opposed to the Heisei version. I really like both of these movies. I like Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. I like Tokyo SOS. I think they're both really, really good. Some of the best of the Millennium era. And so for me, this Mechagodzilla, it gets very close, but not quite there. But I am going to put it in Titan tier above Anguirus. And wow, it's been only 2 in Titan tier. I know it's like there's a little bit of a gap there. I know it took me a while to get another one in there, but Kiryu is not quite S tier for me because it's just not my preferred kind of Mechagodzilla, but it's right there. I think if you're doing the, you know, Gundam mech style Mechagodzilla with humans piloting it, I think Kiryu is the best example of that, and I don't think it could be surpassed. And now the final kaiju of the original Toho movies before the solo Shin Godzilla in -1. This is Monster X, which of course does turn out to be Ghidorah, I know, but for a while in the film, Monster X is kind of its own entity. So I think it's fair to rank Monster X as its own monster before the transformation, because for a while in the film, it is its own monster, you know? At least that's my rationale. You don't have to agree with me. This is just my personal list, whatever. I think Monster X is okay. I'm going to put it up in Monster Island tier. We'll put it down there. We'll put it down there. It's okay. It's all right. And at last, we are getting into monsters that were introduced in the Monsterverse that is ongoing right now, beginning with Godzilla 2014 and the Mutos, which I've always really enjoyed the Mutos themselves. I'm not the biggest fan of the Godzilla 2014 movie in general because I think it has a lot of flaws that are really hard to ignore, especially as time goes on. But as far as introducing a new monster, I think that was a great idea, you know? As much as I love King of the Monsters, it's still my favorite in the Monsterverse. And despite the fact that it brings back all the classic foes that I love, I like the idea of creating new monsters for a new universe, you know? I don't always want to see the same monsters brought back again and again. I like the ambition of saying, hey, I have a cool enough idea for a monster that we're going to make a new Godzilla enemy. And I appreciate the ambition of that rather than just doing, you know, Mothra or Ghidorah again. So to introduce a new Godzilla with a new monster, great idea. Great idea. You know, I'm all for it. I think that Muto is pretty cool. I'm going to put it up in the Monster Island tier, and I'm going to put it actually above Mecha King Ghidorah. I'm going to put Muto there. Yeah, I like it. Now, this next one is the, I think it's called the War Bat from Godzilla vs. Kong, and Godzilla does not fight this creature. Kong does. So, you know, I don't know why putting it on the list. I just thought the design was, you know, worth talking about. It's like a snake with wings. I don't know. I like that. Godzilla doesn't fight it, though, and all things considered, Kong kicks its ass pretty easily. So we're going to put it in the army tank tier, but we're going to put it above Minya. All right? We're going to put it above Minya. And then we get to the Monsterverse Kong, and like I said, this Kong is so vastly different than the original Toho Kong that I just have to put him here because he is his own character. He has a lot of personality, a lot of human mannerisms. Like, they go out of their way to definitely make Kong the protagonist of those movies, which I'm actually okay with. I like Kong being the underdog and Godzilla being this powerful force that he has to go up against. I love this Kong. I love this Kong. I want to see more of him. I didn't include anything from Kong Skull Island because if I did that, then theoretically I'd have to include every movie that's in a Godzilla universe. So then I would have to include, you know, Frankenstein versus Baragon and the original Varan and like all of the amoeba and all that shit. So I wasn't doing that. So I'm not including Skull Island either. But this Kong gets Titan tier. Oh, I'm sorry, Anguirus. God damn it. I started this video praising Anguirus, and now I keep finding reasons to push him down further and further. Anyways, this Kong goes up in Titan tier. And hey, I'll say this about the Mechagodzilla from Godzilla vs. Kong. They made Mechagodzilla evil again. That's great. I don't like the design. I think it looks a little bit too much like a Transformers movie rather than a Godzilla movie. I'm not a fan of the design. But as far as the execution goes, it's great. I love how powerful this Mechagodzilla is. I like how it forces Godzilla and Kong to team up at the end. Yeah, it's a little bit contrived, but I enjoy it. And I also like how it basically implies that it's the remnants of King Ghidorah controlling Mechagodzilla. At least, I don't know. They don't explain it too well, but that's what it seems like. Yeah, I like this one. I just don't like the design. But other than that, I think everything about it is good. So I'm going to put this Mechagodzilla up in Monster Island tier. Right below the original Kong. Okay, so this next one, the name escapes me. I don't know why. I can't remember this kaiju's name. It's like the big rock thing that showed. So the problem is, in Godzilla King of the Monsters, they awaken all of the kaiju, right? And you see glimpses of particular kaiju, but they don't really do a lot. They basically have the same roles as Varan in Destroy All Monsters. So there's this big rock monster that shows up. And I'm going to have to put it in army tank tier because I don't think it does anything and I can't even remember its name. So because I can't even remember its name, I'm actually going to put it below Varan. I don't know. And then this one, I think it's called Behemoth. This one, I really like the look of it with the giant tusks, very woolly mammoth kind of thing. I hope that they do something with this creature at some point in the future, but so far they haven't. It shows up, it destroys a building in Godzilla King of the Monsters, and at the end, it's one of the monsters that bows down in front of Godzilla. Really, really cool looking. It just hasn't had enough time to shine for me to put it up very high, so I'm going to have to put it in Cillian tier, but I'm going to put it, yeah, Cillian tier there, just because I love the design, and I hope that it comes back someday. Then we have Cilia from Godzilla Kong the New Empire, which is basically just a giant spider. I don't know why they didn't just use Kamunga from before. Maybe they didn't have the rights to, but this one also looks like it has more of like an exoskeleton, where Kamunga is kind of like a tarantula, like it's furry. This one definitely has more of like a bug, like exoskeleton feel to it. I love the beginning of New Empire where Godzilla wrecks its shit. Good stuff all around. I think I'm going to put it in, I'll put it at the top of the army tank tier. It did its best. Suko from Godzilla Kong New Empire. I mean, Suko's cool. I loved when Kong picked him up and like was throwing him around, hitting other enemies with him, because what else are you going to do with him? What's really funny is people figured out the height of this creature, even though it's like a baby. it's the same height as Kong was in Skull Island, which is weird to think about. Zuko's all right. He's better than Minya for sure, but I still don't love Zuko. You know what I mean? Like, I think he's all right. I'll put him up in Zillion tier. I'll put him right below, my boys, Gaiyan and Megalon. I'll put him right up there. This one I almost forgot to add until the last minute. Tiamat. That is the kaiju that Godzilla defeated in order to access its power and power up to fight at the end of Godzilla Kong: The New Empire. I almost forgot to add him to the list, but I remembered last minute. This one also reminds me a lot of Manda. It's like sort of like a snake creature that we see in the ocean. Gets wrecked by Godzilla pretty early. Not much of a fight, but, I like its, flashiness. It's very pink, very bright, very neon. I think I'll put him up in Zillion tier as well. And put him right there. The last two are the antagonist of Kong: The New Empire. We have Scar King, which I will be honest with you guys, I was a little bit let down by. Now, again, I like the idea of Scar King, I guess, but ultimately, he just kind of pales in comparison to some of the other enemies we had. Like, he's not up to snuff with Ghidorah. He's not up to snuff when Godzilla was fighting Kong himself or Mechagodzilla. He's definitely a dick. Like, he's definitely an asshole. He's definitely deserving of a spot of being a villain, but just didn't love him. Didn't love him as a villain. And he's definitely, like, again, we're doing the doppelganger thing. Kong has a doppelganger here, and then Shimu is kind of Godzilla's doppelganger to a degree. Although not as much as, like, Space Godzilla or Mechagodzilla. But, yeah, Scar King to me, I've tried to let him grow on me, but I just can't put him up that high. He's going to go in Zillion tier, but I will put him above Space Godzilla. And then finally, Shimu, giant ice-breathing lizard kaiju. The design is okay. Its execution is all right. You feel bad for it. It's a mistreated creature, right? But again, just not in love with it, not in love with the creature. I'll put him up in Zillion tier as well. But, yeah. Yeah, below, yeah, he's going to have to go there. He's going to go below Space Godzilla. All right, so there you go, guys. There is my ranking of all of the movie Godzilla Kaiju villains, antagonists, whatever you want to call them. That is my ranking. So up in the top tier, my top ones are Ghidorah, Mothra, Biollante, Rodan, original Mechagodzilla, and Destroya. I think those are the best of the best, but then we slowly just go down the list. And the bottom two tiers are kind of like the take it or leave it. But everyone else in the middle, I still enjoy to various degrees. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Again, I know this is just my own personal list. This is not meant to be objective. I'm sure some people will hate this list with every fiber of their being. But that's okay, because the great thing about Godzilla movies is we all get to have our different favorites and our different rankings, and everyone's list is going to look different, because when you have over 30 movies in a franchise, everyone's going to feel very differently about every movie. So this is just my list. So let me know what you guys think down below. Please leave a thumbs up and a comment to help it out in the algorithm. If you want to support the channel on a deeper level, I do have my Patreon channel memberships and all the social media links where you can follow me down below. And if you like this video, let me know, and I will do a Godzilla ranking video, a Godzilla tier list, where I'll go through all the Godzilla designs and just do Godzilla alone, because we all know if Godzilla was on this list, he'd be number one anyway, so that's no fun, right? But if it's all Godzilla, then it becomes a little bit more interesting. Anyways, let me know what you think, guys. I'll talk to you later.